I'd like to welcome you to Maine's podcast for November 18th, 2025. Cyber, AI, and compliance risks. What to look for in 2026. To guide us through this very timely and important topic, we are joined by subject matter experts Michael Brice, co-founder and CEO of BW Cyber, and Michael Durette, Chief Revenue Officer for Compliance Risk Concepts, Oyster Group, who will outline some of the biggest cyber risks that asset managers and broker dealers should have on their radar as they head into 2026. I'm Robert. What do you see as the biggest issue with the convergence of AI and cyber? What is the biggest issue with the convergence of AI and cyber? And Michael Brice, I'm going to ask you to take us out on this. Michael, you're on mute.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. My apologies. It's a pleasure to be here. When I look at 2026, I am terrified of the enhanced capabilities that criminals using AI can use to attack asset managers in the financial services industry. The techniques they can do span from the simplified attacks that we all saw with the beginning of the Nigerian prince 25 years ago, except that the emails that you're going to receive are no longer going to have that kludgy English or mistypes. But it goes way beyond that. We're expecting to see, and have already seen this overseas and a couple instances in the US, deepfake driven videos that are live with voice synthesization, where you literally believe you're talking to somebody you recognize their voice, they are familiar with what the transaction is, and they're able to convince you to make a transaction, just in the same way we're here talking today. It's going to happen in 2026, and I think many, many people are wholly unprepared for how clever it is and how easy it is to be confused. The other issue that we see related to us is I expect criminals to start breaching AI tenants that clients think are private and where they have their information. Haven't seen that yet. I just know that in the world of security, criminals are always going to figure out ways to make money at our inconvenience. And I would say at this point, unfortunately, I don't have a way to say what the answer is on that other than to be careful with AI and what you put into it and expect this to be the first inning of a nine-inning game in which things are going to change significantly last year on how we protect AI data.
Well, what scares me, Michael, is your comment about we're in the first inning of a nine-inning game. So, wow. Michael Durette, how say you on this topic?
Listen, Michael, I think hit the nail on the head, right? Which is the advancements in technology over the last several years. I think we all watch and marvel today. With those advancements in technology come gaps and risks that organizations face, but also how to utilize those technologies for the greater benefit of that organization. And that's kind of the conversations that we're having with firms, right? Is there's so much technology that's out there that will help us in our business, but how do we do it in a compliant manner? What do we do? To Michael's point on, kind of the AI and large language models and data, it's the natural progression, right? And that's something that as AI use becomes more prevalent within financial institutions, the broader financial services industry, the technology assist is going to be commonplace, right? So if it's large language models, or if it's Copilot, or if it's ChatGPT, or any large language model that's out there, firms are trying to figure out how to utilize that for efficiency, for a bunch of different purposes. With that comes the use of CIP and privacy information, right? So Michael was talking about this yesterday, which is in your own tenant. You might own that data, but where does that data flow and where does that go, right? And I think next year will probably be one of the first instances, hopefully not, but that we're going to see some infiltration in that data. And then it's going to be the regulators, the government wrapping their heads around how to create an appropriate framework for institutions to be able to operate utilizing this technology. I think we're all kind of under the same view, which is it's not going away. it's only going to get more. It's only going to increase, different facets of what firms are using it for. But how to monitor, how to protect, that's going to be something that's going
Yes.
to be paramount.
So Michael Durette, let me follow up with a question directed at you. Given what you just told us, what are the most common cyber threats facing, let's say, RIAs, hedge funds, broker dealers today, particularly in relation to, let's say, social engineering, wire fraud, and credential harvesting?
Yeah, it's great.
What are some of those threats?
Yeah, it's a great. I mean, listen, organizations several years ago did phishing exercises, right?
Yes,
Where IT would send out an email, they would check to see who opened it, and then there was enhanced, kind of the people that opened it would go into enhanced training, right? And that has gone by the wayside, right? In the way that, and I see Michael Brice smiling for a specific reason, right? The technology is moving so rapidly, but if you look at, individuals are guilty of username and passwords, right? Having the same usernames and passwords or something similar to that. But also the way and look and feel of phishing or of kind of these cyber attacks or kind of breaching those walls looks very different and very clean than the Nigerian prince that Michael talked about 25 years ago. And
yes,
that's something where, just because you click on the email sender to see who it comes from doesn't necessarily mean that that shows you everything, right? And so these are things that I think firms look to history and say, hey, this is how we need to train, this is how we need to monitor. But the technology and the adoption and the nefarious uses of it are moving so quickly that we see this in the broad financial services marketplace and clients and customers that we have and conversations that we have where there are information that's out on the dark web, right? Which then they're
I
able to
see.
find their way into different areas of an organization, right? And so that's definitely something that we're looking at having conversations because, again, it's important to protect privacy. It's important to protect data. And really, if you're an RIA or a broker dealer, you have to protect the assets, right? And
Yes.
that's the, little, 1% leakage is still leakage. And that means that money is leaving. And that means that there's issues and gaps and there's remediation that needs to occur.
Yes, yes. Michael Brice, what about you? How would you characterize some of the common cyber threats facing RIAs, hedge funds, and broker dealers at this point?
Yeah, it's bifurcated, and that is we have a set of clients who are very well protected. They do all the basics. The basics aren't basic though. It requires investment, IT capability, and cyber capability, and then we hit them with sometimes monthly phishing. And Michael, I smile when you're talking about phishing, and I've had some of those CTOs for those clients say, "This is a waste of our time, Michael. Do we still need to keep doing phishing?" Because they're good at it, right? And by the way, these fishes generally aren't going to get through to them, and they've got other controls. But the fact is, yeah, we still need to do it because it's the 1 in 100 that slips through and tricks the controller when the CFO is perhaps out on vacation or maternity and isn't quite aware of the common threat. The other side of the bifurcation, though, is we have a lot of clients that are completely unprotected and completely oblivious to the fact that they haven't put any kind of investment into a email filter. They don't have any controls related to having computers enrolled into their environment, which means anybody can log into the environment who doesn't have a company computer. Simple, basic things, again, that are not basically implemented. And those organizations are at great risk. I especially see this when we deal with PE portcos. We deal with a lot of portcos and have some portco flash assessments that we do to kind of give our PE clients a quick pulse check on how secure they are when they purchase and acquire their portcos. And generally, we're capturing anywhere from 1/3 and above for people putting in their user ID and password and those same individuals not having any protections on their environment. And these are organizations that are very susceptible to ransom attacks, which can be much more devastating than what we see in the asset management and wealth industry. In the industry for PE and hedge, Bob, I would say the biggest by far concern is wire fraud. And that's where it's not very complicated to do, but with AI, the ability to fool your finance organization and to find ways to get you to think you've affirmed invalid instructions are becoming extremely easy. And we're seeing figures of 6, 7, and even 8-figure losses because of that today. And here's the kind of the spoiler alert. Your friends are not going to tell you if their firm had a 6, a 7, or an 8-figure loss in a wire. Even at the Christmas party, I promise you. Maybe after 3 drinks, they're telling me at the bar after I speak. But it's amazing. And who in the asset and wealth management industry wants to say, oh, by the way, we lost $1 million yesterday? You know, that's not real good for business.
No,
So,
it's not.
Michael, can I ask you a question? So, how how do you get firms, right? Because it needs to be from the top down, right? And it needs to be also from the bottom up where individuals on the firm. How do you get firms to kind of realize how important this is, right? Because
Uh,
similar to compliance, right? It's one of
yeah.
those things where they wish they invested in it the day that they needed it, right? So how do you, what are the conversations? How do you kind of look at firms and have those conversations? Because
Yeah.
your weakest entrant is where the hole is and where the problem lies.
I'm going to use a parallel with your business, Michael. Probably your clients aren't going to be as cognizant of the risk until one of their friends has a bad audit. And for us, no matter how many of these webinars I do, how many public speaking events I do, and people sometimes say, "Gosh, Michael, you terrified me," but they forget in a day or two. It's when a friend tells them what happened, or they hear about it in the news, and they realize this was a 7 or an 8-figure event. This is an event that gets the CFO fired. That's when it becomes a CXX agenda.
Interesting. And Michael Brice, since you have the floor, let me follow up with a question here. Let's talk about deep fakes.
Hmm.
Okay.
I like deepfakes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So number one, what are they? And number two, how are they related to artificial intelligence? Deep fakes.
Yeah. So a deepfake is when you take my body, my face, my voice, except it's Bob speaking for me, and he's speaking into AI, and you think it's me, plain and simple. It used to be something that the movie industry could do with a lot of work, and it was very prescripted. Now, with just a few words or slight conversation, perhaps someone calls you on the phone and acts like they're selling you something, and you're polite to listen to for a minute or two, and then they might get some video. Goodness help us, like for Michael Durette, yourself, Bob, and me using this video. This is how they feed their language model, their large language model. And then they talk into the AI, and out comes my voice and my image. And using that in conjunction, usually with insider knowledge related to some kind of email breach, which when it happens, if they're smart, you don't know about it, and they'll be watching for weeks or even months. They can speak to you about a known transaction, a known activity, provide the wiring instructions, affirm those wiring instructions, and you'll believe it. Where we've seen this in the US, it was, and I'm not going to go with AI specifically, although it was AI enabled, or some of the ransom attacks we saw in Las Vegas, in which they had caller ID spoofing, in which basically they called the help desk and it looked like it was an executive from the company and it had the executive's phone number and the executive's voice, and they reset the password, let this person in that shouldn't be in. It's just that simple. So I see AI and these attacks with deep fakes and voice synthesization and other simple techniques like caller ID spoofing to actually make it really simple for criminals to trick people. Now, the good news here is because it's not all gloom and doom. The good news is education is the factor that remediates this. You just have to know if somebody calls you on the phone and says they're your uncle and they're in jail and you recognize the voice and they need $10,000, you're not going to pay it. Well, if
Right.
it's business and it's the same person calling from the deal team saying, here are the wiring instructions, now that you've seen this webinar, maybe you go, I believe you, that's great, but I'm going to pick up the phone and call you back because I know I can call you on a secure line, but I'm not sure your line to me is secure. That's
So
my 2 cents, Bob.
so I guess we're going to see Clark Gable make more movies, and which I'm sure Hollywood's not going to be into. But
You're
I
dating
saw
yourself, Bob.
what's that?
You're
I
dating
know.
yourself.
Well, and I saw something recently. I saw John F. Kennedy making a speech he never made before,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I was completely fooled by it. But fascinating stuff, and you're 100% right. It's something that we have to be prepared for, no doubt about it. Um, Michael Durette, let's pivot a second. Let's talk about Reg SP for a second. How do Reg SP requirements affect reporting and disclosure of cybersecurity incidents to clients? And what are the regulatory expectations for incident management? Michael Durette.
Yeah, and it's Reg SP is an interesting. I mean, this is almost a 25-year exercise, and we actually had an internal firm-wide call late last week in regards to Reg SP, and our head of regulatory research kind of walked through everything because in the financial services industry, there isn't always a ton of change, right? Normally, there's comment period. Something will go in. If you look at the AML rule as an example, that was vacated by FinCEN and pushed out for 2 more years. But originally in 2000, kind of Reg SP governs how broker dealers, RIAs, and investment companies provide privacy notices and disposing of data, right? And
Right.
if you think about over the last 2 decades, information systems, third-party cloud arrangements, inter-financial institution data sharing, cyber, right? They've all evolved, and you've created gaps in the original regulation. So in 2024, the amendment was adopted in May. It went into a rule in August of 2024, August 2nd. And then now we're getting down the pike within the next 2 weeks. Large RIAs, broker dealers basically have to adhere to Reg SP starting December 3rd, right? And then smaller institutions have a 6-month lag, so June of 26. But it also kind of aligns with privacy notices, and timing provisions of prior amendments of Graham-Leach-Bliley, right? But if we think about this, kind of what is Reg SP, it introduces 6 broad pillars, right? Number 1 is an incident response program, which is now required under the safeguard rule. Customer notification obligation, service provider oversight and notification, right? And, if you look at what Reg SP does, it's adopting what I think Michael and I were just talking about over the last, 15 minutes or so, and saying firms now have to have a response plan. There needs to be notification. Data is a very private, either customer data, firm data. All of that is very private. And when there is a breach or there is an issue, there needs to be a response plan for remediation and being able.
And Michael, did I hear correctly or read correctly? Is it the case that investment advisors, firms that run in excess of 1.5 billion in AUM, have to meet certain standards by December 3rd? Did I read that somewhere correctly?
Correct. That's correct. Yep. Large RIAs, broker dealers on December 3rd, and then 6 months later for the firms below 1.5 billion. But again, it's one of these situations where Michael was talking about breaches and all these different things, right? And when you have a hybrid RIA and broker dealer that's sharing information, right? Or if you actually look when you open an account at a financial institution, if you go and look at the disclosures, that's where the bodies are buried, right? And that's where they show you that they'll share information, they'll share data. Your banks do that, right? I mean, every financial institution does that. And so now, right, I mean, I think we're all too common where there was a breach of our healthcare company. There was a breach here. Our information has been compromised. We'll offer you a year free LifeLock, right? That information is out there in the dark web. And the people that are trying to access and use that data aren't using it to help you, right? They're using it to gain access, credential stuffing, to be able to replicate, at Michael's point, right? Being able to utilize these different tentacles to infiltrate an organization and be able to either pull money off, to be able to take money out, ransomware, all these different things. So really that reg and rule coming into effect now, make sure that institutions and organizations really take data and privacy and security as a forefront issue for them moving into next year and beyond. So, I applaud the industry, and I applaud kind of the the regulators for putting this in there. It'll be really interesting to see, right? I think Michael said at the beginning, 2026 is the year of infiltration, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
We're gonna find out, and we're already again. I hope Michael. I hope no one's using my voice and my likeness. I mean, that's I feel bad for everyone that does that. But that's something that it will be a fascinating thing to follow. But I think it's also a scary thing, right? So using firms and other financial services organizations, RIAs, broker dealers, these news stories are going to start to come out, and then it's going to be the CFO, the COO, the CCO, the CEO. How are we prepared? How are we covered here?
Yes.
It's inevitable.
Thank you, Michael. And gentlemen, I have two questions in from the audience. So let me hop right to them. All right. Question number one. In speaking to several wealth manager RIAs, they are seeing a cyber penetration test as too expensive versus the risk associated with not doing it. Are you seeing smaller entities? We all hear about big company problems, but are you seeing more ransom attacks with smaller entities?
You mind if I take that, Bob?
Please.
I'm not seeing any ransom attacks with small companies. I see ransom attacks going to manufacturing and PE portcos. And candidly, even if a small company is ransomed, all of our clients, and partly because this is what we require, and partly because once they're regulated, they tend to have some infrastructure with an MSP, are leveraging the cloud. The days of having the on-prem servers with the file server and everything in the office, and if that were ransomed, you're totally without options. Those days are gone. Most if not all of our clients, excepting some family offices, by the way, are putting that in SharePoint and in the cloud, and it's much easier to back up there. So I actually think the regulators are behind on this one,
Okay.
and the due diligence vendors, because they all ask, did you do a pen test? And we tell our clients, I would like to give you a pen test light. Let's just test you from the outside, a lot cheaper, and let's do a cloud security assessment because that's where your data is. Cloud security assessment is just as critical as a pen test used to be, but nobody has really, and that person, nobody, I always have to be careful who that is. Nobody has said, hey, we think it's important for you to protect your cloud data. And
Right.
that's where we see most of the attacks going now, breaking in. And it's not that Microsoft or Google have bad controls, it's the configuration settings and the business enablement that our clients do or don't put into the cloud that are causing them problems.
Okay. Thank you. Michael Durette, any thoughts on
Yeah,
this?
yeah. I mean, I think listen, there's more opportunity at the larger organizations.
Right.
But I'm interested to get Michael's take on this because as you go down market, at least in size, right, the formality, the processes, everything that's in place might be a little bit looser on those smaller organizations than your Goldman Sachs's of the world,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And that's and so listen, I don't think we want to give ransomware or cyber criminal 101 here, right? But if you look at the smaller organizations, they're typically they're lean and mean with staffing. They don't have a CISO, right? That's something that kind of as you get up market, you see that. So it's interesting, and I would love Michael's thoughts because I think to your point, right? Ransomware is one thing, but kind of going in from cyber attacks, again, they're going to start from the top, but there's an interesting view of the smaller organizations might need a little bit more help because they don't have that prescriptive nature already embedded within their rules and regs.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when we say smaller, I'm just going from the lens of 150 AUM to about 750 million. Now, what I would say is, gosh, when you talk about the big houses, anybody over 5 or 10 billion AUM, they should be worried about ransom. That's a whole different enterprise. But the question is, I heard Bob, are these smaller ones? And really, the biggest issue that we see is they haven't protected their cloud and their email. And my gosh, man, email can be really valuable if you can get in and there's a multi-million-dollar wire coming from an investor, and as a result, you can do a deep fake and call that investor and they think you're the manager when really you're the criminal, and trick a family patriarch into redirecting a wire, that's where we see the risk here. But a really good question, because I do see the industry changing for these smaller clients with respect to pen
Sure.
testing, when it might just be 5 or 10 people with 5 or 10 laptops as their whole
And, and,
infrastructure.
and gentlemen, there's another follow-up to these series of questions. And let me read that to you. So the smaller companies are at true risk of cyber attacks on their cloud data. That's a question. But it
Yes.
seems the penetration test is still a necessity. Is that the case?
I'm going to answer out of both sides of my mouth. I'm going to let Michael answer because he's on the regulatory side. There's not a regulatory requirement to do a pen test per se. Now, there
Right.
are a lot of regulatory requirements around being secure and a lot of risk alerts about pen testing. And I would say if you're a registrant and you don't pen test, you've really put yourself at risk for a number of reasons, to include it's going to be on an ODD if you want institutional investment.
That's a
But
good point, Michael.
yeah, but the real value I see is you should do a pen test at some point, and then we recommend to our clients the next year to swap out a pen test with a cloud security assessment.
Okay. And how are clients preparing and protecting themselves at this point to prevent AI security leak or breaches at this point? What's the trend? And I'll go to you first, Michael Durette. What are you seeing?
It's a great question because it's so new. Michael, we were talking about this yesterday, right? This is over the last 3 years, right? Last 3 or 4 years, that organizations are trying to figure out what to do, right? And I think that's a lot of the conversations that we have, which is we know what's out there, but we don't know internally how to manage against it, how to put the infrastructure in place, what to do. And so that's really something is firms, listen, if it's the use of AI in investment management, right? Or utilizing large language models, right? Like all of these things are brand new to an industry that's been around for 100 years. And so what worked in the past and the rules and regs and the infrastructure and the checks and balances from 10, 15 years ago isn't applicable today. Right. So I think that's what firms are trying to assess, and then to create an operational framework which allows for them to be able to be compliant or to
Okay.
mitigate the risk. They're never going to go away, but
Yeah.
it's a constantly evolving as the technology, as the cyber attacks, as the threats change. This is a living, breathing document and idea that firms have to grapple with. So CISOs, again, or your CTO, they're worried, right? And 20 years ago, they were always worried, right? And it was, don't worry about it. We don't have that. We don't have the assets. The custodian does. But today, it's not the case, right? And looking at customer data, looking at all these things, that is something that firms are, that they have, and that they're going to get in trouble for if it's breached. So this is something that, again, as firms start, right? I think to Michael's point from the beginning of this in 26, right? There's going to be an event. There's
Yes.
going to be something that's going to happen, which is going to force the regulators, the government, the regulatory bodies to say, this needs to be addressed, and here are the ways that they're going to address it. But right now, we all see the slow motion train wreck coming. And listen, the organizations that are out in the forefront thinking about this and handling it, they're in a better spot, but it doesn't mean that they're immune from their name being the one that starts 26.
I'm going to ask Michael Brice for his opinion on this, but I just want to interject something. And I've thought about this before. Everyone that's on this call, whether you're a speaker or part of the audience, probably has a brokerage account. And I often think, how do we evidence ownership of the securities in that account? Again, I'm going to date myself, Michael Brice, but there used to be something called stock certificates, right? And while they still exist, they're in dematerialized and immaterialized form right now. Most people don't handle stock certificates related to their their investments. It's all held in street name, and and therefore that means the statements you receive, the trade confirms, that's your evidence, along with the electronic record. And so I wonder at what point do criminals start messing around with that type of information?
But Bob, to be honest with you, I couldn't even begin. I mean, that's the whole trust model,
Yeah.
you know. Um, it's interesting. I can
But you
only
know what
say,
I'm saying, right? I mean, it's
oh no, I totally do. At the end of the day, though, it's just we trust and therefore it is. And I mean, when was the last time you actually saw a piece of paper associated with a piece of
I'll
stock?
tell you that's why every time I get a notice from my brokerage firm, they want to know, do I want to go to electronic?
Yeah.
Go electronic. I say no. I continue to get the paper. But anyway, I digress.
And I'll just say something for the audience here. And I think if you bought precious metal, which I think you do, you actually have the precious metal, and it's not just a certificate, right?
That's right.
Very interesting. I'm with you on that one, Bob. Following up on Michael's point, what I would say about AI, because I want to make sure I get this point across before the webinar ends today. All all of our clients are using AI in some form or another, and they should, and we are too. And it's like saying, the internet is here. We're going to wait until 2010 before we use it. Of course not. Jump on board, right? Well, it's 2025, 2026, and if you're not using AI, you're probably going to have some uncomfortable questions with your investors. What we are seeing is predominantly, I'll call it using your term of paper here, Bob, it's a paper-based approach to create a policy to say this is how you can and cannot use the firm approved LLM. That's about all that we're seeing. While I think that is, I'll call it table stakes. You must have that. If you're going to have
Yes.
an audit, you better have something related to that. I would say what our clients are not doing across the board is auditing to make sure people are complying with that. My experience is when it comes to cybersecurity training, the efficacy of the training we provide lasts about 3 months. So if you put your policy out 3 months and a day ago, most of your employees have probably forgotten about it. They might go ahead and put in some marketing materials or put in some customer, bank account, all the things you're not supposed to put in yet. The other issue we see is what I'll call shadow AI. If,
Okay.
if the firm if the firm says we're just using Copilot or ChatGPT and we've bought this and you log in here, when we do some of our assessments, we find that people are using company accounts to play with other models, which is a little scary. Um, and there are actually some easy ways to figure that out and stop it, because then you do have to worry about a leak going outside to these public models.
Yes.
And then there's an evolving set of services called AI security assessments. I haven't seen a lot of people doing that. A lot of people are asking about it. But I think that's where we're going, much like I talked about cloud security assessments, where how do you know technically your settings provided by the vendor are properly implemented?
Okay. Michael Durette, what steps should firms take to remain compliant with exam priorities flagged by regulators regarding cybersecurity control and documentation? What steps should they be taking?
Yeah, and listen, the SEC put out their exam priorities for 2026 yesterday, right? So the government's now open, so the SEC put them out there, right? But if you look at cyber, it's so broad, right? And I think, right, to Michael's point, and looking and saying, hey, we have a cyber policy, right? 3 months and a day later, people forget, right? And that's something that, protecting information, protecting data, the use of technology, what to do. Listen, we all know firms have a business continuity plan, right? We all know that there's rules and regs that are in place, right? But this is something that's constantly evolving. So when you look at 2026, I think Atkins has, Chairman Atkins for the SEC has come out and said, we want to open up capital markets. We want innovation, right? But also we want to protect the consumer. We want to protect the retail investor, right? And that was part of it yesterday, was talking about products that fit the right demographic, right? And little things that you would not think of as kind of the SEC's exam priorities. But again, it's protecting the retail investor, protecting Main Street, right? And that's something, when you look at cyber, firms, models, customer information, bank account information, intellectual property, all of that is part of the data that's housed within the organization. So looking at, you might have a policy and that's great, but is it applicable to your business, right? Did you
Right.
write the policy? How did you look at that policy? Does it equate? Does it break down all of the different areas in which your firm operates in? And I think that's the other thing too, right? Firms might have a policy, it might be a generic policy. Do they follow it? Right? Where are the gaps? I think Michael's, and if you look at kind of what Michael's been talking about over the last 45 minutes, it's, coming in and looking at those assessments, looking and making sure that if you say you're going to do it, you do it. And that's what the regulators want,
And
right?
that it's actually applicable to your business.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's the biggest thing, right? Because again, you have entrants that come into the space that just have a plain vanilla off the shelf cyber policy. That's great. You have a policy, but does it really affect and does it really mitigate the issues and how you use technology and what's inside of the organization? And that's something that, again, these sweeps that are going to occur, we know, that's how they gather information. And that's something that we're going to find over the next, 6 months is, cyber is I think one of the biggest issues and threats that's out there, and how do firms protect against that?
Yes. Thank you, Michael. Michael, Brice, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, completely different perspective. I agree 100% with Michael saying. From my perspective, it's not that people have policy or they do whatever they're supposed to do. The regs basically say, from a cybersecurity perspective, it's adjusted to your business. So
Right.
$150 million three-person emerging manager wouldn't be doing the same as Goldman Sachs, obviously. But without a doubt, the biggest issue we see, and I'll use your example since we were talking about pen testing. For people in the audience that don't know what a pen test is, a pen test is when you act like a hacker and try to break in to a client's
A
environment.
penetration test. You want to see if you can penetrate the
Yeah, but
enterprise.
Penetration testing works both from the outside, or you pretend that you've somehow gotten in with a fish, and now can you move around and take down the firm through something like ransomware. We do pen testing. Well, in addition to pen testing, there's a whole set of services that we do for clients depending on their size. And most clients know what their peers are doing, and it's, as long as you're doing what your peers are doing, you're probably going to be fine. The issue we see, without a doubt, is maybe close to 50% of the assessments we do, absolutely nothing happens with the recommendations. And that one breaks my heart. And I almost don't blame the clients, because I think sometimes they're like, hey, you did your cyber stuff, we're good now, right? And I have to go, no, now you need to make some changes and to put some investment in it. And that's where that process stalls. The other thing I would recommend, and it's a personal bias, I have to be very clear, but I I I often see clients having the organization that runs their environment testing it. And I just find that to be a little bit of a conflict of interest, because you really need to have a rub between your provider and the assessor, for the same reason you have a fund administrator and don't do your own NAV.
Understood. Good point, Michael. And Michael, Brice, since you have the floor, let's talk a second about um, how do attacks targeting, let's say, third-party vendors and service providers increase the risk exposure for the money managers and broker-dealer community? In other words, all of these entities do rely on third-party vendors. So speak for a moment about the risk there, please, Michael.
So critical third-party vendor risk is a regulatory requirement, and it's something that every registrant needs to look at. The way we see this is that's really going to become important on December 3rd if you're over 1.5 billion, and June 3rd if you're under 1.5 billion, because it'll, I'm just going to speaking plain English here, it may turn into a game of gotcha. You had a third-party vendor that had your client's data. That vendor got hacked and they didn't tell you. Guess what? That's now your fault. Or they got
Say that
hacked.
one more time. One more time. So if you have a third-party vendor and what?
And they get hacked.
Yes.
And your client data that you stored with that third-party vendor is compromised, and they don't tell you, it's probably your fault, because amended Rule SP says you have to have made reasonable attempts to coordinate with those vendors to get notification within 72 hours, and then you have 30 days to notify. And I can foresee, through no fault of the managers in the future, third parties that have their data being breached,
Yes.
and this notification process not taking place in a timely manner, and whether it be the regulators or the investors themselves coming back and being very upset and turning into a reputational or financial issue.
Yes.
Michael, this is your world more than mine. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's funny you talk about reputational risk, right? And you look at financial institutions, and the Fed and the OCC just dropped reputational risk from their exams, right? So, it's one. No, I agree with you, and it's as you look at advisory firms and broker dealers, they inherently partner if it's custodian or if it's portfolio management software, or there's so many partnerships that are out there. And in the today, where you are an outsourced chief compliance officer, an outsourced chief investment, right? Firms outsource and utilize partnerships all day, right? And that's how you grow and scale. And
there are virtually no completely vertically integrated financial institutions out there, right? At some point, someone, even though the biggest among them, right, rely on outsourcing to some degree or another.
They do, and listen, it creates efficiencies, and you're
Yes.
able to do things that you couldn't from your scale and size, right? And with that comes the complexity, right? So,
Yes.
Michael, look at the largest custodians that are out there, right? What happens when one of those custodians, or like you can go down that laundry list of financial services organizations that are paramount to how an RIA or a broker dealer operates. What happens when their data is compromised?
Yes.
And it's gonna happen. And I'm really interested, Michael, to get your thoughts on that, because you can see it coming, right? And I think the question, right, on talking about the smaller firms, right, the most bang for the buck is in those third-party providers or with those larger institutions, and then it all trickles down to your $150 million, emerging manager who utilized X, Y, and Z, who now is, has a problem.
Yes. So Michael Brice, a moment ago, you or the beginning of the podcast, I think it was you who said that we're in the first inning of a 9-inning game here. Okay. And so my question is policy enough to protect a firm? And is it enough to prevent any type of SEC finding?
I'm going to have to defer to Michael Durette on SEC findings and how they would react to things. It's not my world. What my world is on policy, and I just reiterate what Michael said, is if you have a policy, you better follow it. Plain and simple. That's the gotcha game. But the way we see policy is more technical, and it's a pet peeve of mine. I read these written information security policies all the time. I think someone wrote one 20 years ago, and they've all been copied for every emerging manager in the world. And they say these things like, we'll have a password policy that does this, and we'll do that. But there's no, like, how do you do it? And if I ask a manager, they go, I don't know. I think our MSP is doing it. And the MSP, I look at them and, they're looking away like all of a sudden they're uncomfortable because no one's told them to do that. And oh, by the way, you have to pay more money. And so I would just say on the technical side, when you have a policy related to security, it has to be no more than a page long, and it needs to have some kind of audit capability that you could, and I'm saying this theoretically, that you could theoretically put the policy and the audit confirmation into AI.
Okay.
And at some point in the future, it could tell you if you're following it or not. And spoiler alert is on the security side, nobody follows their policies 100%. It's impossible. But what you want to do is get as close to 100% compliance. And
Sure.
I like examples. I'll give you an example. I've seen antivirus policies that just say we'll have antivirus and stop, malware. Well, really, an antivirus policy should say this is the AV we use. It's installed on every computer, and we make sure it works. And the way you test that is you get an audit from all your computers to make sure it's installed, and you see that the configuration is set to on. So a long-winded way in saying, from a security perspective, it's not that people follow their policies, it's they have their policies and they audit to them.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Michael Durette, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I'll give back to Michael on the compliance.
Yeah, no, Michael was spot on there. And I think when you look at the SEC exam priorities that came out yesterday, right, they talk about having a compliance program and following it, right? And I think that's the whole thing, right? So if it's cyber or it's great that you have a policy, but is it adopted? Is it followed? Right. And I think that's the biggest thing, right? Listen, large language models are incredible, right? We could go in right now into ChatGPT or Perplexity or whichever large language model. And Michael, we could type in, create me a cyber,
Yeah.
right? I'm an RA, create me a cyber policy, right? It's going to spit something out that's probably pretty decent, right? And how many firms are starting to use technology to be able to put policies and procedures in place, right?
So,
But
so,
that's,
so,
yeah.
gentlemen, let's come back to AI for a second. So, what is AI complacency, and how does it relate to policy? What
I'll
is
take that.
AI complacency, and how does it relate to policy?
I'll take that one, Bob, and it kind of relates to what I said before. We're seeing people who are creating AI policies, putting it in the policy handbook, and then forgetting about it.
And not really following up on it. Okay,
Yeah, and it's really scary because if we go in and do an audit and say, let's just see how many people have
sure.
company IDs that are associated with other LLMs, and oh gosh, Bob here, who's really important, has four different accounts: ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, and we use something different. That's what I mean by AI compliancy or yeah, complacency.
Okay, Michael Durette, any thoughts on that?
No, I defer to Michael Brice on
Okay,
that one.
okay. So, gentlemen, what are the best practices for financial firms? What are the best practices financial firms should be adopting for periodic risk assessments, vulnerability testing, and incident response plans?
From my standpoint,
Yes,
it's take it serious, right? The checking a box now for this doesn't
doesn't work.
doesn't work. It doesn't serve the organization well. And
It's
that's
a waste of money.
something,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly, right? It's, again, you have to put in the time, effort, and energy to truly have a program, if it's on the compliance side or it's on the cyber side, right? And, like, listen, and Michael, in full disclosure, you could type in create a compliance manual in ChatGPT, right? Like, yeah, but there's hallucinations and there's a
Oh no,
lot of gaps.
it's no.
No,
Uh,
but that's something that kind of I look at it is doing the bare minimum might get you by today, but
Right.
in the long run, you end up putting yourself at risk, the organization at risk. And it's something where the exercises that you go through, and they might be painstaking, and it might feel like it's, the phishing or whatever that may be. There's a reason why you
yeah.
do it, right? And it's to create the culture of compliance and, to make sure that the organization is buttoned up because that, you know, that 55th person that clicks on the email, who doesn't pay attention to that stuff, that's the gateway and the back door into all of the information. So my biggest thing is when you do these exercises, take them seriously. And I think to Michael's point, if there's remediation steps, you have to do that, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
Bob, let me be a little prescriptive here for people, because
Please.
from our perspective, we would say on an annual basis, you should be doing a cyber risk assessment. You should be probably doing a pen test. We talked about that. I have some personal feelings, but if you're going to get asked about, did you do a pen test on a DDQ from an institutional investor, you kind of want to say yes. We think you should review your policies to include BCP and DR, especially just about everybody out there needs to update their incident response plan so that it maps to amended Rule SP because it's changed the landscape significantly. The other piece here we're seeing in the market that has increased exponentially is we have a lot of clients, usually over the 1 billion AUM range, maybe it's 1.5 billion because that's a special, are doing incident response tabletop exercises. And not only does it help the executive team to know that there's such a thing as an IRP and they understand the regulatory compliance, it also puts something in the file that says they take it seriously in case something happens.
Fair enough. Michael Brice, while you have the floor, what is shadow SaaS and how is it related to AI data leaks? What is shadow SaaS and how is it related to AI data leaks?
And I kind of spoke to this earlier. SaaS, software as a service, basically what
Yes.
Michael was saying that just about every organization out there now has to help them with efficiencies. We're moving everything to software in the cloud and vendors. Shadow SaaS is when your employees sign up for applications that you're not aware of. We see this all the time. I've seen before where people were using unauthorized applications in a small team and putting all sorts of proprietary data in there. None of the firm didn't formally know about it. As those people left, they had access to that data for perpetuity until one day we found out that, like, what's this and why is anybody using it? It applies to AI because we're seeing, as I mentioned, a lot of people who have shadow AI. And that is just all of these extra AI tools that are not approved by the policy that they're playing with, that if something happens, and my feeling is if the regulators find out, they're going to get hammered for it.
So Michael, Brice, what about picking? Every once in a while you'll see online an unsubscribe button. Is that something we should stay away from?
Yes.
Okay.
I think you should stay away from any button you push online when someone sends you an email.
Okay.
Plain and simple. But
Got
Bob,
it.
I want to hit something that I've been reading recently to throw at Michael
Please.
here. Are you running into or do you have concerns with what the SEC said about AI washing?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, again, Gensler, I think there were two firms, right? And we briefly talked about this, but we put out a regulatory research bulletin specific to this, right? Which was Gensler came out, I think it was the summer of last year, on AI washing in two firms over the past couple of years. The technology and the power of these large language models is truly fascinating, right? And I think, Michael, we're in that first inning, second inning of this technology. And it was interesting. I had a conversation with someone a couple of days ago who is a professional money manager about using this technology to be able to spit out kind of the future, right, of portfolio allocations. And there's a reason why back testing never really works when it goes into full effect, right? But it's definitely something where, firms we're seeing right now, and from firsthand experience, firms that utilize AI, the SEC is coming in and they have an routine exam. There's a standard stock of questions regarding your normal business operations, and then the use of AI, which is the kind of similar standard stock questions, right? And so that's definitely something that as firms start to utilize AI for portfolio management, asset allocation decisions, right? How do you use it? How do you disclose what's behind it, right? And if you say that you use AI, you better be certain of kind of the disclosures and the risks and what you're using it for. And so it'll be really interesting kind of as we move forward. Because again, Gensler out and Paul Atkins in at the SEC, but AI washing is definitely something that was, that was the first of its kind in that press release that the SEC put out. But firms are utilizing this, and Bob said it a couple of minutes ago, right, where everything is somewhat outsourced, right? So portfolio management and investment discretion and decisions using these technologies to be able, if you say you use it, there better be a policy, there better be something behind it, because you just can't use it on a whim and then kind of market it as your AI services.
Right. And apparently there have been two firms that have been penalized by the SEC for making such statements. Gentlemen, in our closing minute or so, what is the one big cyber thing you foresee for AI from a security perspective? What's the one thing if for our viewers to take away with for 2026? What's the one thing, Michael, Brice? What's the one thing you would advise them to focus in on for 2026? AI and cybersecurity related.
Deep fake voice synthesization, wire fraud directed in relation to portco transactions and to your vendors. I'm sorry, to your investors.
Wow. Okay. Michael Durette?
Yeah, I think you own the data. You better protect it. That's, again, that is again, Michael, I hope we don't see it, but there's going to be something next year which creates rules because we're barreling down, a situation right now where there's going to be some breach. There's going to be some issue with the cloud, with the models somewhere, which is going to create this oversight forced by, Congress and then the regulators themselves.